Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to It's Murder Up North. Continuing the Wakefield Prison series with this, the second part of the Jeremy Bamber arc. If you haven't listened to the previous episode, please do so before proceeding, as these initial episodes will lay out the complex issues surrounding the events leading up to the deaths at White House Farm, with many of these pieces influencing how the case was ultimately perceived. In this episode, I will continue to focus on the life of Jeremy's sister, Sheila, the joys and the tragedies, her relationship with her adoptive parents, Neville and June, and the impact various events had on her psychologically. We left the previous episode with Sheila having returned from a modelling assignment in Japan. A shell of her former self and burdened with the feeling that there was something psychologically wrong with her. Her mental state was impacted further when her third pregnancy ended in heartbreak due to a medical error that occurred during a cervical examination. Stitches had been required, but when these became infected, she was forced to end the pregnancy. Sheila perceived this as being her fault, and these thoughts became entwined with her mother's religious rhetoric, recalling June had condemned her simple acts of having sex before marriage, and had declared that her daughter was the devil's child. These barbs took root in Sheila's psyche, leading her to question whether she was truly evil, or whether she was being punished for her sins. Despite these negative thoughts, Sheila presented a happy countenance, and suggested to her reluctant husband Colin that they should try again to conceive. Perhaps Colin's reluctance came from the fact that despite her happy facade, he observed her pain, and felt she was pushing it aside in a manner that was unhealthy, but his unease only led to arguments. The friction and growing distrust between the couple intensified during Sheila's 21st birthday party, when Colin disappeared for a couple of hours with another woman. Unable to contact him, Sheila grew increasingly anxious, and his refusal to explain his absence upon his return only added to her fraught state. Once all the party guests had gone, Sheila exploded. Lashing out, she put her fist through a window. The permanent scar from this incident would be used against Colin during future arguments. Perhaps attempting to flee from her faltering relationship and the negative thoughts that were brewing in her mind, Sheila opted to join her father, brother Jeremy and cousin David Boutflower on their annual shooting holiday in Scotland for the first time. This trip would be brought up following the deaths at White House Farm, as questions were raised regarding how familiar Sheila was with guns. As stated in the previous episode, the photographer Roland Crowe had previously observed that she didn't seem to know how to handle a weapon, and while Jeremy would claim she was proficient with guns, her cousin David argued to the contrary, stating that he could only recall her ever firing one shot, which she did with his gun, to sate her curiosity, having never fired a weapon before. Yet these discussions still lay in the future, as the fresh air and beautiful scenery of Scotland provided a brief respite for Sheila, who returned to London feeling refreshed. In 1978, Sheila and Colin discovered they were expecting once more, this time with twins. But the joy this brought the couple did not mend the cracks in their marriage, which were becoming irreparable. The pregnancy proved to be a difficult one, with Sheila developing complications which required a cervical stitch to ensure the babies were delivered at full term. And, as a precaution, she was admitted to the Royal Free Hospital for bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. As Sheila lay in her hospital bed, she would receive a sign that her marriage was truly faltering, when she discovered that Colin was having an affair. But her complicated pregnancy was her sole focus, with the twins being born prematurely on the 22nd of June, 1979. Delivering two beautiful baby boys, Daniel and Nicholas, the new mum was visited by her family. Although June seemed distant and cold as she stood in the doorway and simply said, "Who's a clever girl then?" Unbeknownst to Sheila, her mother was also suffering a mental burden. Having continuously repressed her feelings, June had focused on caring for others. Not only was she looking after her mother Mabel, but she had allowed her mother-in-law Beatrice, whose health was ailing, to move into Whitehouse Farm. Aside from tending to the two elderly ladies, June continued her duties at the church, helping with events, attending services, prayer meetings, and delivering food as part of the Meals on Wheels service. She added to her busy schedule by visiting her daughter and grandsons on a fortnightly basis, giving Sheila love and support through practical means, looking after the twins, doing the housework and shopping, as she tried to help Sheila navigate her transition to motherhood. By this time, Sheila and Colin's marriage was effectively over, with the latter forming a relationship with Jan, the woman he had been seeing while his wife was in hospital. The separation deepened when Colin moved in with his father, leaving Sheila to live alone in a flat in Hampstead with two babies. Despite the breakdown of their marriage, Colin continued to stand by Sheila and played an active role in raising the twins. June and Neville had also paid for Colin to learn to drive, which in turn allowed him to bring Sheila, Nicholas and Daniel to Whitehouse Farm on a regular basis. Virtually a single mother, the loneliness of caring for the twins took its toll, with Sheila unaware that the thoughts and feelings she was experiencing were signs of postnatal depression. However, she did recognise that she needed help, and called upon Camden Social Services, to whom she reported fears that she was going to harm her children. An assessment determined she was not a danger to her babies, but she was in need of additional support. The boys were placed in a day fostering programme, which meant that they would be taken care of for a few hours a day, allowing Sheila time to focus on herself and look for employment. While she was receiving assistance with the twins, and was encouraged to consider her own well-being, Sheila began to express signs of mental decline, revealing she would self-harm, become inexplicably angry, paranoid, and suffered from hallucinations. She recognised that this was not normal, and requested a psychological evaluation. In the meantime, her mother continued to visit on a fortnightly basis, but their relationship was a fraught one, as both women suffered from their own mental health issues, breeding toxicity between them, which only served to worsen their conditions. Sheila's brother Jeremy would later recall that June often became infuriated with Sheila, condemning her daughter's behaviour, which in turn caused the young mother to believe that her failed marriage was all her fault, and that she had been touched by evil. With mother and daughter demonstrating hostility and anger towards each other, it was only a matter of time before one or both of them would snap. Following the separation of Sheila and Colin, it was agreed that the latter would care for the twins on weekends. This, combined with the additional support provided by social services, seemed to help alleviate Sheila's mental strain. Emerging from the throes of depression, she started to take pride in her appearance again, and with encouragement from friends, Sheila returned to the social scene, including re-entering the dating pool. Her newfound confidence extended to her modelling career, as Sheila secured some high-profile shoots, including one with the car manufacturer Peugeot, and she briefly became a sought-after model, with at least 3 clients requesting to work with her. There was still one aspect of her life Sheila wished to confront. Ever since she was told she was adopted at 7 years old, Sheila had struggled with feeling disconnected from June and Neville, whose love and support she was immensely grateful for, but that nagging thought that she was not their child continued to play on her mind. Alongside this, she harboured a sense of abandonment and rejection, believing that her birth parents had given her up because they did not want her. Keen to resolve this aspect of her life, Sheila requested her adoption records, through which she worked to uncover the identity of her birth parents, although the answers would take months to acquire. In the meantime, her modelling career would start to flounder. Despite her initial burst of success, she encountered 4 months without booking any jobs. Her agency would later state that this was because she had rightly become more focused on her children, but this was having a negative effect on her ability to book certain campaigns. Sheila, who had always struggled to recognise her own beauty, saw things differently, believing that it was because her looks were fading. Her devotion to her children, however, was undeniable, and was recognised by Camden Social Services, who, following a meeting to discuss her case, determined she was doing everything she could for Nicholas and Daniel. Social workers noted that she sought help when the boys had encountered medical issues, including a burn on Nicholas's knee and abdomen, which was deemed accidental, and an ear infection which Sheila was quick to have checked by a doctor. Although it was not seen as a cause for concern, social services also noted that sometimes Sheila was slow to act, and occasionally required prompting to do things. This would become evident as her mental state declined, and friends had to tell her to look after her general appearance and hygiene. Colin also had some concerns, with him noting that there was something different about his estranged wife, stating, "I started noticing a slow change in her. She began to be less lively than she had been." Sheila would continue to fight against her mental burdens, maintaining a social life and going on dates, although none of her encounters developed further than a couple of meetings, leaving her caught in what June perceived as a world of promiscuity. It was a lifestyle June was convinced she was supporting by paying her daughter's rent, and she had considered withdrawing the funds, perhaps believing that if Sheila couldn't afford it herself, she would be forced to move back to White House Farm and away from temptation. However, June did not go through with her plan. June's reservations regarding her daughter's lifestyle offers a glimpse into how she perceives situations through a religious lens. Labouring under mental strain, June would reach a new low upon the death of her mother-in-law, Beatrice, on the 23rd of December 1981, which left her feeling inexplicably guilty. She descended into depression, which prompted Neville to postpone his responsibilities at the magistrate's court in order to care for her. In a moment of rare transparency from a family who usually kept private matters guarded, he revealed to those he worked with that she was, quote, very ill with a nervous breakdown. As June struggled with her depression, Sheila, perhaps perceiving the impact such news would have on her adoptive mother, opted to conceal from Neville and June that in the spring of 1982 she had traced her birth mother, Christine, who was now living in Canada with her husband and 3 children. The pair wrote to each other regularly, and Sheila became reassured with the knowledge that not only had her birth mother been unwilling to give her up, but was eager to reconnect with her now adult daughter, although the pair would not meet in person for a couple more years. While the uncertainties of her past had been laid to rest, her life in the present was unravelling. The divorce from Colin was finalised in May 1982, although Sheila would retain her married name of Cafell, but she now faced an uncertain future as a single mother. However, Colin would remain a constant and supportive part of her life. Sheila's mental state, which had been wavering over the last few years, was becoming increasingly concerning, marked with mood swings, depression, and a growing distrust of people around her. Initially, she blamed her surroundings, telling her brother Jeremy that the flat she and Colin had shared in Hampstead had too many painful memories. As such, her parents sought out the assistance of Sheila's friend, Freddie Amani, to help them find a new home for their daughter and grandsons. By December 1982, Sheila and her twins were settled into a new flat in Maida Vale, still funded by her parents, and for a while her depression was sated, and it was deemed she no longer required the assistance of social services. Meanwhile, the 2 boys started at nursery with their personalities beginning to flourish. Typical little boys filled with energy, Nicholas, who was slightly smaller than his sibling, was humorous and independent. and although barely 3 years of age, he was eager that people saw the difference between him and his brother. Daniel was more stoical, with a kindness and empathy that he liked to extend to others. His gentle nature demonstrated through the care he showed his baby doll. While the twins seemed happy and settled, an incident in May 1983 would see Sheila and June's issues rise to the surface once more, this time with consequences for one of the boys. It began during one of Sheila's visits to White House Farm with the twins, where an argument broke out between mother and daughter. Sheila disapproved of June attempting to imprint her religious beliefs on the children. The disagreement escalated to the point that Sheila and the boys left the farm in a taxi, with Sheila later telling a friend that the whole episode had upset the twins. But this would not be the end of the issue. The details surrounding exactly what occurred vary from source to source. However, at some point along the journey, the taxi door was opened and Nicholas, who was not secured, fell from the moving vehicle, causing him to strike his head and require treatment in hospital. While the toddler was being treated, an investigation into the incident determined there was no negligence on Sheila's part, with it concluding that it had simply been an accident. But for Sheila, the guilt of what had occurred ate away at her. She considered the impact of the argument with her mother had on the situation, recalling that June's religious rhetoric was still sounding in her mind during the taxi journey, causing her to be distracted. But ultimately, she blamed herself for not being more aware of what was happening around her. This only added another layer to her already troubled mind, with the turmoil now becoming visible to others, including the secretary at White House Farm, Barbara Wilson, who noted that upon Sheila's next visit, the young woman's spark had disappeared, replaced with a sullen and withdrawn countenance. As Sheila's mind raced not only with guilt but her ponderings of good and evil, the seeds planted by her mother's words years earlier, when she had berated her daughter and Colin for fornicating on her land, and labelled Sheila the devil's child, had grown into vines that were strangling her rational mind. This was compounded when Sheila began to hear voices, trying to convince her that she was Joan of Arc or the Virgin Mary. Distressed by these new auditory hallucinations, Sheila found the one person who throughout her life had provided her with reassurance and stability. Being woken by his daughter late one night, Neville listened to Sheila, with their call lasting for several hours, by the end of which Neville concluded that it was time to seek help. On the 4th of August 1983, Sheila was admitted to St Andrew's Hospital under the care of Dr. Ferguson, who had previously treated June for depression. Upon Sheila's admittance, the doctor perceived her as being, quote, very agitated and psychotic, disturbed, delusional thoughts, and overvalued issues that she accepted as truth. It was believed that Sheila had been suffering from acute psychosis for a couple of weeks, but her condition had been developing for at least a couple of years, with the doctor finding she was, quote, more liable to misinterpreting the world around her, to draw the wrong conclusions, to feel threatened in some way, particularly with the concept of good and evil. When June had called Sheila the devil's child, those words had planted themselves in her daughter's psyche. And while most people are able to shake off such thoughts, for Sheila they manifested into a belief that she was evil, with her mother's reliance on religion to chastise Sheila only serving to deepen this belief. However, Dr. Ferguson was keen to point out years later that June was not at fault. Her words may have been hurtful, even damaging to someone with a healthy mind, yet to someone like Sheila, who would be diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, even the most well-meaning words can be perceived differently or felt deeper by the sufferer. Amongst the many concerns Sheila expressed was fear for her children. She worried that her evil would infect them. She disclosed disturbing ideas that she may influence them to enact violence or sexual activities upon her, and was particularly concerned that Nicholas would grow up to become misogynistic and homicidal. Despite these fears, the boys did not demonstrate any behaviour which would be a cause for concern. They were both happy and well-loved little boys, and it was apparent that Sheila was a loving and devoted mother. However, in communications with her family GP, Dr. Ferguson would disclose that when Sheila was first admitted to the hospital, she expressed thoughts of causing her children harm, stating she felt, quote, capable of murdering them, or communicating some ability for them to become evil or murderous at a later date. Further assessments during her stay at the hospital determined that Sheila did not pose a threat to herself or others. Her primary issue derived from June's relationship with religion, but the doctors found that she had a healthy connection with her ex-husband, Colin, her father Neville, brother Jeremy, and her sons. On the 10th of September 1983, Sheila was discharged into the care of her family at Whitehouse Farm, with the twins remaining with Colin in London as they had throughout Sheila's stay in hospital. Sheila's condition would be managed by medication. However, the true extent of her illness was not disclosed beyond her immediate family, only adding to the shock that loved ones felt when the deaths at Whitehouse Farm occurred 2 years later. Over the following years, Sheila's condition seemed to be stable, but friends did notice her insecurities and found that her mother remained overbearing and would criticise her daughter's choices, failing to recognise her achievements, which only served to cause Sheila to further doubt herself. By 1984, the roller coaster of Sheila's life hit a dip again. As she struggled to book modelling work or hold down a steady job, her confidence declined and the depression surfaced once more. Her friends noted that she wasn't looking after herself. She had also developed some concerning habits. It was known that she was a heavy smoker, but her choice to start using cannabis in what she called social settings was a cause for concern, as the drug had the potential to exacerbate her schizophrenia. Alongside this, Sheila had not been attending her appointments with Dr. Ferguson, who contacted her GP fearing that if she went without treatment, Sheila faced the risk of relapsing into a psychotic state. As 1984 was coming to an end, however, Sheila visited Dr. Ferguson, who was pleased that she was showing signs that her condition was under control. During their consultation, she disclosed that she still had auditory hallucinations, but the doctor believed that she was able to differentiate between what was real and what was in her mind. In all, the doctor felt that Sheila was on the right track, and as she, Colin and the twins enjoyed Christmas of 1984 at Whitehouse Farm, no one could have foreseen the nightmare which would unfurl just 8 months later. Sheila's mental state wavered over the ensuing months. Depression and bouts of insomnia haunted her. Yet through this, she had her father there on the other end of the phone to listen and comfort his daughter as she talked into the early hours of the morning. Sheila's modelling career had faltered completely, and when a photographer approached her to participate in a photo shoot, she jumped at the chance. But these would be far from the artistic and tasteful nude shots she was promised. To Sheila's horror, the photos were overtly explicit, forcing her to request the original film and concealing the images, hopeful that they would never see the light of day. Later that year, her brother Jeremy would be accused of trying to sell these photos to a newspaper after her death, although he and his friend Brett Collins would argue that they had met a journalist in a pub who had asked for a story and photos, yet the insinuation that he intended to sell them any images of his sister were fabricated. These photos had filled Sheila with shame and a realisation that her modelling career was truly over. She recoiled into her shell, her depression deepening. She retreated from the world, causing her social circle to disperse, with only a few friends remaining by her side, as her mood grew increasingly glum and quiet. It was only a matter of time before she suffered a relapse, which came in March 1985, just a couple of days after she had been visited by June, and this appeared to have put Sheila on edge. On the 2nd of March, Sheila's friend Freddie Armani bore witness to her descent, with him recounting the events to the police following the deaths at Whitehouse Farm. He had visited Sheila that day and recalled her being, quote, jumpy, uptight and panicky, going on to recall a phone call which occurred between Sheila and her friend Tora, with him stating, quote, Sheila was apologising to Tora for a religious book that her mother had dropped off at Tora's house a couple of days previously. During the call, the phone went dead. Sheila suddenly became hysterical, mumbling about the phone being bugged. She became like someone possessed, ranting and raving. She was striking herself and beating the wall with her fists. I tried to calm her, but she did not seem to hear me. I became extremely frightened, not only for her, but for myself. She kept talking about the devil and God, and stated that God was sitting opposite her. And, unlike what her mother said, he in fact loved her. Feeling helpless, Freddie called Sheila's former mother-in-law Doris, but her arrival at the flat only exacerbated the situation, as Sheila, quote, became even more violent and abusive. Doris located a prescription for Sheila's medications and instructed Freddie to see if a chemist would issue them while she stayed with her frantic former daughter-in-law. Upon his return to the flat, Doris left, taking Nicholas and Daniel with her. Fortunately, the two boys and Tora's daughter, who had come for a play date with the boys, had been in the twins' room, unaware of the turmoil occurring elsewhere in the flat. The little girl would be collected by her father later that night, at the request of Freddie, who feared that something bad might happen. Until then, she was kept in the safe confines of the boys' bedroom, while Freddie continued in his attempts to help Sheila, but he admitted in his police statement that he, quote, became extremely concerned for my own safety. He contacted Sheila's doctor, who arranged for another practitioner to come out and see her, but as Freddie recalled, she refused to let him examine her, shouting that he was trying to poison her. Now, by this time, she had become completely irrational. This doctor left, unable to treat the patient, and in desperation, Freddie called another doctor, who once again found the patient too combative to examine. It was only when Sheila's regular GP arrived at around 9:20 that evening that she calmed down enough to be administered a strong dose of medication. Shortly after, Tora's daughter was collected by her father, with Freddie expressing to the police that he was relieved that the little girl was safe, confessing that he feared that, quote, Sheila may use violence towards someone. Facing a night alone with his volatile friend, Freddie reached out to Sheila's father for help, with Neville stating that he was unable to come straight away, but would be there by the morning to collect Sheila. That night, Freddie did not sleep, as he observed Sheila's mood cycle from calm to manic. He was exhausted and fearful. Recalling the remainder of that night, he stated, Sheila was behaving like a person possessed, rambling about the devil and God. I went next door to her neighbour who came through. Sheila sat down and combed or brushed her hair. She had a blank expression on her face and was staring into space. Every now and again she would suddenly become violent again, ranting and raving, then stopping as quickly as it started. Then she combed her hair. This carried on until her father arrived in the morning and arranged for her admission into a hospital. When her father came into the flat, Sheila became a different person. She spoke to her father in a calm and collected manner. I could not believe the change in the girl. Sheila would be readmitted to hospital, where her delusions revolved around Freddie being the devil and that the CIA had been watching her. It was believed that part of her relapse may have been induced by her recreational drug use, with her doctor's notes revealing that she had previously admitted to using cannabis and cocaine with friends. She would be officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia on this occasion, but as had occurred previously, it was found she was not a danger to herself or others, and with the right treatment, her long-term condition could be managed, although relapses may become more frequent over time. Once again, her extended family would be kept in the dark regarding the full extent of Sheila's condition, as evidenced by a letter she wrote to her cousin Anne Eaton, which disclosed the delusional episode, but this was explained away as a breakdown due to stress. Changes had been noted elsewhere, however, as in the weeks leading up to her being taken to hospital, the twins' nursery had noticed that the usually bright and happy boys were turning up late and demonstrated unsettled behaviour. Colin learned from his mother Doris that the boys had stated they often had to dress and feed themselves. Concerned, Colin decided that the boys should reside with him permanently, with Sheila spending time with them whenever she wished, an arrangement which remained in place up until the tragic events of August 7, 1985. With regards to caring for the twins, Colin had been offered an alternative. June suggested the twins stay at White House Farm. He declined, not only because it would take the boys away from what was familiar, but Colin also felt uncomfortable with how June tried to impress her religious beliefs on the children. His decision was justified further when the suggestion of them staying with their grandparents led to Nicholas and Daniel bursting into tears, while on another occasion they would express that they were scared to go to White House Farm. Sheila would be discharged from hospital and once again resided for a short while with her parents, and to help manage her condition she was prescribed a once-monthly 200mg injection of haloperidol. This prescription drug is described by the NHS as, quote, an antipsychotic medication that works by blocking certain types of nerve activity in the brain. This can help with feelings of anxiety and other symptoms of mental health conditions. Some of the side effects of this medication include feeling sleepy or drowsy, insomnia, muscle stiffness, and problems with movement, such as feeling restless or problems controlling the movements of one's arms or legs. Discharged into the care of her parents at White House Farm, there were signs that Sheila hadn't completely recovered from her medical episode. As recalled by Helen Grimster, a cousin of the Bambers who had come to stay at the farm just a couple of days after Sheila was released. The 14-year-old barely knew her older cousin, whom she found herself alone with one afternoon, an encounter she would recite to the police following the tragedy. Helen advised that she had become disturbed by what had started as a normal conversation about school, during which Sheila had shared her experiences of being bullied, before going on to ask Helen some unnerving questions regarding whether the 14-year-old had taken drugs or contemplated suicide. The 27-year-old confided in her young companion that she had experienced such thoughts on more than one occasion. Sheila then began talking about how she was a white witch, tasked with ridding the world of evil. Helen recalled that Sheila continued by saying June had accused her of having lost her soul and had encouraged her to turn to religion. It was a conversation which stuck in the terrified teenager's mind, but little did she know that in less than 5 months, her unnerving older cousin would be dead, along with 4 other members of her family. Sheila returned to London in mid-April, and her friends reported that she still displayed some unusual behaviour. She often had a distant look and seemed weak or stiff in her movements. She also complained that her medication had left her feeling extremely tired. Just a month after returning to London, Sheila would meet her birth mother, Christine, for the first time. The visit strengthened their bond, with the pair discovering they shared a lot in common, and Sheila's friends noticed that the reunion had brought back some of her old spark. During the visit, Christine was introduced to her grandchildren, Nicholas and Daniel, but she did not meet with June or Neville, and before she headed back to Canada, she made it clear to Sheila that she had never willingly given her up, ending her trip discussing her hopes she could visit again soon. As summer of 1985 began, June had recently been made the church warden at St. Nicholas's Church, but was showing signs of mental distress. The farm secretary Barbara Wilson recalled her tearful employer confiding in her regarding Jeremy and Sheila. June disclosed that she felt unable to help them or solve their problems. This feeling of helplessness prompted June to seek solace in her Bible, looking for comforting words and verses, some of which she displayed on the walls of the farmhouse, perhaps in the belief that their constant presence would give her the hope and comfort she craved. Ever the attentive husband, Neville noticed his wife's low mood and felt unable to leave June alone. Therefore, when he needed to leave the farm for prolonged periods of time, he asked Barbara to keep his wife company. As June's mental state floundered, so did Sheila's, as the euphoria provided by her biological mother's visit had started to wear off. And while attending the twins' 6th birthday party in June of 1985, Sheila's mind began to fill with thoughts of her failures. She sat observing her boys, delighted by their excitement, all the while feeling she had failed them as a mother. She then looked upon her ex-husband, who stood beside his new partner Heather, a kind woman who had accepted Colin and his sons. Their happiness forced Sheila to contemplate her own situation. Single, divorced, working a dead-end job. She should have been enjoying the party, but these thoughts were louder than the happy laughter and cheerful music. They ate away at her, unable to focus on the joyful scenes, as the thoughts screamed intrusively, driving Sheila to the point of tears. As she wept, she confided in her ex-mother-in-law Doris, disclosing that she felt like a failure and longed for Nicholas and Daniel to live with her once more. To people who saw Sheila that summer, they encountered a frail and quiet woman who seemed to stare beyond them in an unsettling manner. On a visit to White House Farm, Barbara Wilson recalled being in the kitchen talking to June, when Sheila, who had up to that point remained a silent presence in the room, blurted out, "All people are bad and deserve to be killed." But then she fell silent again, as though no words had been spoken. In July, upon her request, Sheila would be given half her dose of haloperidol, after she had complained that the drug had made her feel exhausted and lethargic. However, this would not prevent her from seeming as though she was zoned out, with friends noting that she still appeared to suffer with weakness or stiffness in her limbs. Her spirit was lifted temporarily for her 28th birthday on the 17th of July, where she mingled with friends and seemed hopeful about the immediate future. This included a planned holiday to France with the twins, after which the boys would join their father on a trip to see his family in Norway. Her hopefulness became deflated as July drew to a close. The last week of the month began on a sore point, with Sheila getting a haircut she instantly regretted, and later that day she was stood up by a date, knocking her already fragile confidence. Issues at her cleaning job had not helped matters, as her employer had expressed that Sheila's work was unsatisfactory. The manager later noted that aside from her lacklustre performance, the 28-year-old had a dishevelled appearance, stating that, quote, "She smelt quite badly of body odour," adding, "Her general demeanour was lethargic and she spoke very slowly." Fearing that she was at imminent risk of losing her job, which would in turn be detrimental to her hopes of having the twins living with her again, Sheila headed to an employment agency, where her unkempt appearance once again drew attention, with it being recalled that she also seemed distant and uninterested. Others who encountered Sheila that week found her to be unsettled and restless, with her unease bordering on paranoia. This, alongside her appearance, changed momentarily as the week came to an end. Sheila arrived at a friend's barbecue, dressed smartly with immaculate hair and makeup, her big smile and sparkling greyish-blue eyes lighting up as she spoke. This gave those in attendance a glimpse of the Sheila they had known prior to her diagnosis and the medication which had dulled her personality and stolen her strength. Although some were happy to see this side of Sheila, others met it with scepticism, believing she had merely put on a front for the occasion. Sheila's mood may have been lifted by the thought that she would be spending the next week with her sons, although her plans for their holiday had changed. Instead of a trip to France, she had opted for the familiar surroundings of her parents' farmhouse in the Essex countryside. It is possible that Sheila still felt apprehensive about this visit, and, not wishing to go alone, she asked her friend Tora Tompkinson and her daughter to join them. It was an offer which Tora declined, with the friend recalling later that she had no reason not to go, but a gut feeling made her say no. On Saturday the 3rd of August 1985, Sheila spent her last evening in London at a party held at Colin's flat, where the twins mingled with guests and even set up a small museum in their bedroom, charging people to view it. As Colin later recalled, his 6-year-old boys had different approaches to money. While Nicholas was careful and saved up, Daniel either lost it or he gave it to his mum, feeling that she needed it more. While the twins enjoyed the party, guests observed that Sheila seemed like she was in a world of her own, and when she did speak, it was mainly with people she knew. Others recalled she moved as though her limbs were weighed down, her speech was slow, and she seemed unable to focus. This behaviour could have been caused by the joint of cannabis she had smoked with her brother Jeremy, as depending on the individual, the drug can cause a person to become lethargic, confused, and spaced out. Having agreed to pick Sheila up the following morning, Colin bid her goodbye as her brother Jeremy drove her back to her flat in Maida Vale. That night, Colin's mind raced with the concerns he harboured for his ex-wife regarding her ongoing medical needs and the future care of their children. He knew that June had advised Sheila that she may not be fit to look after the boys due to her health, and the thought of no longer being allowed to see her children had terrified the 28-year-old. However, Colin had assured her that he would not let that happen, but he also knew that Sheila's mind could amplify and distort such fears. He also felt uneasy regarding the visit to White House Farm, especially after he had been shown pictures drawn by Daniel. One depicted a monstrous-looking woman, whom the 6-year-old explained was Grandma June, while in another, seemingly pathetic piece of artwork, the child had drawn a picture of an individual carrying a gun, surrounded by people lying on the ground. Was this just the vivid imagination of a child, or the disturbing foretelling of events which would take place on the 7th of August 1985? Join me next time as I delve into the deaths at White House Farm and the investigation which followed.
So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.